Are NATO forces now engaged in direct combat with Russia? So first, let's watch this video titled, NATO Now in Direct War versus Russia.
Folks, for the last 14 months, we've been told two things about the war in Ukraine. Number one is that the Ukrainians are winning and the Russians are losing. And number two is that NATO and the US have absolutely no boots on the ground and are in no way, shape, or form involved in a proxy war with Russia. Well, because of the classified documents that were released by Jack Teixeira, we now know that that is incorrect. We now know that we have close to 100 special forces from NATO that have boots on the ground in Russia. Now, it's not confirmed that they're engaged in direct battle with the Russians. And if this is true, this would be illegal by US law. Congress has to approve going to war.
Without confirming the validity of the documents, this is information that has no business in the public domain.
Well, the question now becomes, is this a whistleblower trying to warn the public about the impending war that our leaders are trying to bring us into and avert World War III? Or is this 21-year-old kid, now enemy of the state number one, that the media and government are desperately trying to paint as a criminal mastermind, lock him up, throw away the key, and have us all focus on the leaker and not the actual contents of the leak?
Washington Post, as you know, reviewed video of this suspect yelling racial and anti-Semitic slurs.
Is this a dangerous person? This air guardsman who's now been taken into custody had talked about being a gun enthusiast, had been at gun ranges.
This is a 21-year-old man. He's described as a gun enthusiast, somebody who's maybe hungry for power.
If they were a little bit more clever in the way they tried to paint this guy as a bad guy, then I wouldn't be suspicious. Did you know he's a racist? Did you know he's a gun enthusiast? Well, obviously he's a gun enthusiast. He's part of the military. It just seems very suspicious to me. Seems very Will Smith, enemy of the state, 1998.
Couple of things to unpack here. First off, this is a classic example of Russian propaganda by amplification, the third phase of Russian propaganda. Remember, there's three phases to Russian propaganda: seeding, harvesting, and amplification. Now, this was emailed to me by more than one viewer. I think the creator is named Phil Romain, and he has other videos like Canada is now the top producer of crickets for human consumption and the real reason why people are protesting in France. If you go to his TikTok, you see stuff like the city of Toronto targets unvaccinated children, and this is why Russia is winning right now. So I'm kind of picking up what you're putting down here. And I'll leave links to his stuff in the description and pinned comments below so you can go to it and judge for yourself, or follow him if you like his content. So let's go over the video point by point. Let's start off.
Folks, for the last 14 months, we've been told two things about the war in Ukraine. Number one is that the Ukrainians are winning and the Russians are losing.
Okay, to start, I don't know anyone inside the mainstream media who has said that the Ukrainians are winning. This might be the hasty induction logical fallacy. It's assuming something is fact without showing the sample. He doesn't state, who said Ukraine is winning? He just says, we've just been told. Find me one instance in any mainstream newspaper that isn't the opinion section. Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post that said Ukraine is winning. Now, saying Russia is losing is a more accurate statement because it doesn't seem like Russia can really complete their objectives. In fact, it doesn't seem like Russia knows what their objectives are anymore. So it's kind of hard to complete your objectives when you don't know what they are. This has bogged down many armies, including the United States and Afghanistan, and for that matter, Russia and Afghanistan. Von Clausewitz called it friction. The fact is that there will be no winner of this war. There's only a loser and somebody who loses less. Nobody wins. There's not going to be a surrender ceremony on a battleship and parades. There is only negotiation from a standpoint of strength. Now, let's go on to the next statement.
Number two is that NATO and the US have absolutely no boots on the ground and are in no way, shape, or form involved in a proxy war with Russia.
So is NATO involved in a proxy war with Russia? You could probably make that argument. NATO is providing weapons, equipment, funding, and intelligence. But proxy wars are pretty darn common. This really isn't anything new. Iran engaged in a proxy war with the coalition in Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom. The U.S. was in a proxy war with the Soviet Union in Afghanistan back in the 1980s, and Russia was engaged in a proxy war with the U.S. during the 1960s in Vietnam. Now, this invasion of Ukraine was a war of choice by Russia. NATO was in Ukraine providing military assistance before the Russian invasion, so you could call this a continuation of that military assistance. Russia invaded knowing full well that NATO was already rendering assistance to Ukraine before the invasion. Now, I'm sure Russia was just betting that the West would just peace out, but we didn't. Now, you could probably make the argument for a proxy war if the aid started after the invasion, But Russia invaded Ukraine full well knowing that the California National Guard had been teaching them how to shoot javelins for 23 years. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, like a javelin to the face. Let's keep going.
Well, because of the classified documents that were released by Jack Teixeira.
Okay, so again, this is a tough subject for me to analyze because once you have or had a security clearance, you can't actually look at those documents for the rest of your life. It is illegal. You take a lifetime oath to keep secret information. So I can't even look at those documents unless the government declassifies them. So I'm kind of at a disadvantage here. I can't read those documents, but from what I understand, some of those documents may have been doctored. Let's keep going.
We now know that that is incorrect. We now know that we have close to 100 special forces from NATO that have boots on the ground in Russia.
I know I'm going to sound like Kanye here. I'll let you finish, but I'm not sure if this is a logical fallacy, an intentional misrepresentation, or he just misspoke. Now, I'm from New Jersey, so English isn't my first language. I misspeak all the time. I say things like sorte, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and Iran. And some of that's because I didn't grow up speaking in the kind of house where we said big words or pronounced words correctly. And then I went to college and I was focused on computer science, not English. So I usually hate it when people point out my mispronunciations because I can read as many books as I want. I can take as many college classes as I want. But as soon as I open my mouth, I'm still a working class Irish kid from Lindenwold. So I'm willing to admit that Paul may have misspoken. I do it all the time. The article he references says 97 Special Forces personnel were activated in Ukraine. But he says the word Russia, not Ukraine. So let's kind of try to break this one down. First, I have to say there's a difference between Special Forces and Special Operations Forces. There's only one Special Forces, at least in the United States military, and that's literally the Special Forces branch, or 18 series soldiers. These are the Green Berets of John Wayne fame. The Green Berets are more like teachers than fighters. They go into a country and they train the locals on how to fight. Now, Special Operations Forces are literally everybody else in the Special Operations community that is Special Operations capable. So everybody from Delta Force, to the Army Rangers, to the Navy SEALs, to Air Force Pararescue, you could call them Special Operations Forces or Special Operations capable. Now that we know the difference between Special Forces and Special Operations Forces, let's talk about geography. So again, it's possible that Paul meant boots on the ground in Ukraine. It is totally 100% possible that Special Forces are on the ground in Ukraine in a training capacity because that's what they do. Remember, we never gave up that mission of supporting Ukraine and helping their military. Now, ABC News reported on April 12th that U.S. Special Operations Team is working out of the embassy in Ukraine. Officials emphasize they are not in combat. The article then goes on to say, leaked documents seems to list a total of 97 special forces from 5 NATO countries operating in Ukraine, with the highest number coming from the United Kingdom and numbers comparable to the U.S. team from other countries. Probably there as trainers, but they're almost certainly not in Russia proper or anywhere near the front lines, even if you consider the occupied areas to be Russia. That could have been another thing he was thinking, that the occupied areas are Russia now. I'm not quite sure. Now, here's how I know that there's certainly no U.S. or NATO troops operating inside Russia, on the front lines, or in the occupied areas. There is absolutely nothing to be gained strategically from NATO directly engaging Russia on the front lines. 97 more trigger pullers, even if they're really good trigger pullers, really aren't going to make a difference in the outcome of the conflict. But they can be a force multiplier as trainers. Also note that the disadvantage is the political blowback from sending troops to the front is enormous. Okay, back during the Vietnam War, Russia and Chinese pilots acted as trainers for the North Vietnamese Air Force, and supposedly these trainers weren't allowed to fly combat missions against American forces. Of course they did, because there was no possibility of blowback. Jet pilots are hyper-competitive people. Heck yeah, they're going to strap themselves into a plane and fight the Americans. What fighter pilot wouldn't want to test himself? There's even a song by the Russian rock band Cheiz called Phantom, which I can't play here because I'll get a copyright strike, but I'll leave a link in the description below. The song is from the standpoint of an American F-4 pilot who gets shot down over North Vietnam, and the lyrics in Russian go, "I spot a line of white smoke in the sky. My F-4 starts losing altitude. To save life, I got ejected. My straps got strained. My heart hangs low. I'm breaking into a spin. As soon as I landed, right away, a wild yell came from the bushes. Charlies are squealing there like squirrels. I fell to the ground and froze. Walking on the damned ground again with no helmet in my head, soldiers poked me in the ribs. By their guns from behind, my life got on the edge. Who was the pilot who knocked me out? I asked one of the VCs. Charlie interrogated me and answered, he was our pilot, Lee C. Sin. Are you lying with no use? I clearly heard a transmission. Kola, go, and I will strike them. Vanya, hit him, and I will cover. Russian ace Ivan shot down my plane. So, even in Russian popular culture, the rule of not flying against Americans in Vietnam was kind of a wink and a nod. But the blowback there was reduced. If a Soviet pilot got shot down over North Vietnam, he was either killed, and the Soviets could claim it was a training accident, or if he ejected and survived, he would be over friendly North Vietnamese territory. So there was no possibility of blowback. But if NATO special forces get captured or killed operating inside Russia or on the front lines, there's going to be some blowback. Now, he does go on to say,
Now, it's not confirmed that they're engaged in direct battle with the Russians.
oh, maybe Paul misspoke here. It happens. Let's move on.
And if this is true, this would be illegal by U.S. law. Congress has to approve going to war.
Without confirming the validity of the documents, this is information that has no business in the public domain.
Well, the question now becomes, is this a whistleblower trying to warn the public about the impending war that our leaders are trying to bring us into and avert World War III? Or is this 21-year-old kid, now enemy of the state number one, that the media and government are desperately trying to paint as a criminal mastermind, lock him up, throw away the key, and have us all focus on the leaker and not the actual contents of the leak?
Okay, I think this is the black and white logical fallacy where Paul is presenting two choices. The problem is that there is a third option, that Airman Teixeira is a 21-year-old kid who wanted to win an argument online. Now let's back up for a moment.
Well, the question now becomes, is this a whistleblower trying to warn the public about the impending war that our leaders are trying to bring us into and avert World War III?
Leaders are trying to bring us into an impending war. If they wanted to do that, they would have already done it. So I don't think there's any kind of noble goal here, because the only reason why the West leaders aren't in a shooting war is that they don't want to be. So let's keep going.
Washington Post, as you know, reviewed video of this suspect yelling racial and anti-Semitic slurs.
Is this a dangerous person? This Air Guardsman who's now been taken into custody had talked about being a gun enthusiast, had been at gun ranges.
This is a 21-year-old man. He's described as a gun enthusiast, somebody who's maybe hungry for power.
If they were a little bit more clever in the way they tried to paint this guy as a bad guy, then I wouldn't be suspicious. Did you know he's a racist? Did you know he's a gun enthusiast?
Okay, so guns and racism are like crack cocaine to news organizations like CNN. It gets clicks, it gets views. I understand why they're leading with that.
Well, obviously he's a gun enthusiast. He's part of the military.
At this point, Paul kind of tips his hand that he's never been in the military and is not familiar with how the military works. So, the Air Force has qualification standards to maintain rifle proficiency. In the United States Air Force, you only have to qualify once every 3 years, unless you're deploying or your security forces who defend the front line and gates. If you're security forces, then you shoot once a year. Airman Teixeira was a 1 Delta 751 Alpha Cyber Defense Operations journeyman. Now, this doesn't mean that a non-combat Air Force soldier can't be a firearms enthusiast. I mean, just look at nothing fancy. But not every military member is a firearms enthusiast. I spent 20 years as an infantryman, and while I own a couple of pistols, I'm pretty ambivalent about firearms. So let's move on.
It just seems very suspicious to me. Seems very Will Smith, enemy of the state, 1998.
So at the end, instead of providing proof, QED, we get a seems very suspicious quote. I think this is the begging the question fallacy. You haven't actually proven anything. The other funny thing is follow for daily updates on world events. When I do videos, I always provide linked references in the pinned comments so you can do research yourself. So I guess you can follow Paul for daily updates, but maybe it should be for entertainment value. So finally, this is the classic example of Russian disinformation amplification. Like I said in the beginning of the video, there are 3 phases to Russian misinformation: seeding, harvesting, and amplification. This particular YouTube video is the amplification phase. During the seeding process, Russia places misinformation on fringe Telegram and 4chan sites. During the harvesting phase, some more believable, or that sounds like it could be true, stuff enters the mainstream Telegram and Twitter. Russia figures out which one of these things is trending, which item works, and they get their bots to amplify it. During the amplification phase, that's when you have Russian bots who may not be electronic, they may also be people. You have sophists who you might consider the useful idiots. And then you have the contrarian edgelords, which I think Paul might be kind of like a contrarian edgelord that take this message and amplify it. So I don't think that Paul really knows he's being used as a tool by the Russians. I don't think he's being paid by Russia or anything like that. I think he's just a guy who started a channel and found an information niche, and it seems to be working for him, and he's exploiting that. Like I said, we all have to eat. But I think that this is how misinformation is spread. There is zero chance that NATO special forces or special operations forces are inside Russia. But enough people sent me this video that I felt I needed to do a debunking. One final thing, there is a logical fallacy called the fallacy, which states that just because a claim has been poorly argued, that doesn't mean it's wrong. So could I be wrong? I don't think so. From a logical standpoint, 97 Special Forces troops would not make a strategic difference on the ground. It would be better used in an advisory capacity or as part of the continuation of the original mission before Russia invaded. So I'm kind of going with that I'm probably correct here. Hey, if you like the channel, head on over to Bunker Branding, get yourself a Live, Laugh, Launch t-shirt or a Drone Sweet Drone t-shirt. And if you don't like t-shirts, head on over to Substack. Toss me $5. I promise that money won't go toward premium beers. And thank you guys so much for watching.
Hey everyone! New Ryan McBeth t-shirts and hoodies from Bunker Branding are available. I'm gonna get the HIMARS shirt. What are you gonna get, Donald? The Patriot shirt, because I'm a patriot. It's the best shirt, the biggest shirt. Make 14 tangos great again. What are you gonna get, Barack? Let me be clear. I'm gonna get a Drone Sweet Drone shirt. What about you, George?
I'm gonna get a Knife Hand shirt because they're weapons of mass destruction. What about you, Billy?
Oh, I'm gonna get a Landmine Marker shirt because my presidency always blew up in my face.
I'll tell you what I'm gonna get.
Ronald Reagan, but you're dead.
I came back to tell you that no matter our politics, we're all Americans. And we should buy Ryan's hoodies and t-shirts because they pay for the stock footage and licenses that allow him to make awesome content. So come on down to Bunker Branding and buy a Ryan McBeth t-shirt or I'll start the bombing in 5 minutes.